And I think that's what people don't sometimes realize, is that when you get over the hump of whatever emotion you have about talking with money, and you actually do it and you organize it, maybe it was like you had to roll up your sleeves and do the work, but then afterwards you're like, oh, that feels great. I mean, it's kind of like a workout. Like, I personally never am super excited to go work out, but every time I do, I always feel better, right?
Welcome, everybody, back to another exciting show of the About That Wallet podcast, where we help you build strong financial habits so that you can build that confidence in spending money, talking about money, and even enjoying money. So today I have an awesome person that's coming through. Her name is Elizabeth Husserl, a registered agent, investment advisor, representative, financial advisor, highly sought after speaker, and co-founder of Peak360 Wealth Management, a boutique wealth planning firm. She also does nonprofit work throughout the Americas and has led workshops at major tech companies, including Airbnb and Google. She lives in San Francisco Bay Area with her husband and daughter. So how are you doing today, Elizabeth?
I'm doing great, Anthony. Thank you for having me on the show.
First off, I just want to say congratulations on your new book, by the way.
Thank you.
It's been such a wild ride, I'm sure.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
saw all your notes all over the place. How was that process?
Oh my goodness. I wrote that book. It took me 10 years. So a full decade of sweat and tears. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I said that my commitment to the world was one human daughter and one book baby. And now I feel like I have given my commitment. But I'm so passionate. I mean, similar to you around financial literacy, I'm so passionate around helping people experience wealth differently, which I'm sure we'll dive into, that I knew I couldn't have ongoing one-on-one conversations with people. And so I thought the most accessible way was to write a book. We went straight to paperback to make it as cheap as possible. We're doing an audio book, and it's just being able to be a little voice in someone's ear saying, hey, there's different ways to think about wealth, experience wealth, accumulate wealth. So it was a crazy endeavor. I don't know if I would ever do it again. And I'm so grateful to be at this stage where I have a gift for everyone. So that's what it feels like.
Yeah, because books, I'm not sure. Are we oversaturated with books?
That's a great question. As you are a podcaster, right?
Yeah.
I think our attention span has shortened. And I think we're not so much oversaturated with books, but it's hard to get through them all, right? And so what I tell people, and I think audiobooks continue to have more and more of a place, because you can take a chapter like a podcast episode. And so I think that's how I'm hearing people consume more, is through those, being told the story, the listening, because we're driving, right? We're back to commuting. And so sitting down to read a book is some time of a luxury these days. But listening to books, I still think, is really doable.
Yeah, because now the title of your book is The Power of Enough. And when is it, because you also talk about storytelling in that, and that's the reason why I was wondering about, far as, the books versus the audio, which I love that you do an audio piece, because I do listen to audiobooks. It's a long drive.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that you're going to take that other way, because you mentioned offline that there's like 9 different ways that we have to consume information just for it to stick.
Yep, 100%, which is why, I think, again, your work is so needed and important, is that we have to hear the different messages, often from different angles. I mean, my husband tells me, he's like, Elizabeth, I told you that last week, but then my best friend tells me, and that's when I listen, right? And so we have to hear it, because it doesn't get communicated in the same way. There's often different angles, but there's a common nugget. And by repeating the nugget, then we can actually understand, and we go, there's an aha moment. And so I had a teacher who once told me it takes 9 teachers. And I'm like, it makes total sense. And so when I listen to books, it gives me permission to also listen, not having to remember everything, but kind of leaning back a little bit and letting myself absorb what the little nuggets of inspiration are, and trusting that they're making connections as I listen. So I think we just have to be active participants and engage, and then trust that connections are being made.
Yeah, because we need, and that's the reason why I love doing the podcast, is because, yes, I might talk about real estate and stuff like that, but I've had at least 7 or 8 real estate people on here. Maybe I just need that ninth one to finally get somebody to take action.
Totally, totally. And then I would say take those podcasts, because you probably have them sprinkled across the whole show, is that listen to them in a row. Right? Like on a long drive, listen to them in a row and then take a step back and, what was the common theme? Right?
Yeah.
What was the thing that kept catching my attention? Because the thing with real estate, there's so many different angles. I mean, like anything with money, it can be so complex. But what keeps catching my attention? What's the next first step? And that's where you start.
Yeah. So, because in your book, you also heavily on the conversation around having your money story.
Yeah.
Why should we have a money story?
Because we all have one, right? The reality is that we're all in a relationship to money every single day. I mean, since we were kids, because we were tracking how our parents related to money, right? Did it cause stress? Was there ease? Did they talk about it? Was it super private and secret? I mean, since we have memories, money has been a part of our family world. And we don't talk enough about it. It's still one of those really big taboos. Because we don't like to say how much we earn, how much we spend, we compare ourselves to each other. And so, Anthony, what I like about actually sitting down and writing your money memories is that it gives you a different entry point into starting to tell our money stories, where we can talk about our failures, where we can talk about our successes. But what it does, it kind of lifts a weight off your shoulder to be like, okay, I've lived through these experiences with money, similar to what we were talking about before. Write it out. Read through it as if you were reading a friend's story, right? So write it out, maybe take a walk or come back to it the next day, read it with fresh eyes and be like, if my best friend told me this story, what connections do I make, right? Where have they missed maybe some opportunities? Where have they totally had successes? But read it from a slightly objective view and you'll start to make amazing connections of what's possible. So you can write your money story, read it back to yourself and have kind of a list of money questions that you're working through, see what connections, and it actually starts to feel fun, right? You were talking about, how this podcast is potentially experiencing joy one day in your relationship to money. That's a lot of what I talk about in the book, just practical, tangible practices to experience a little more fun and a little more joy, no matter how much you have. You can
So what questions should we start asking ourselves to kind of start diving into it?
Yeah. So there's so many, but like around the money story, ask yourself what your first money memory is, right? Where were you? Who were you with? What were you doing? Was it a pleasant experience? Was it a challenging experience? Who was in the room? What were they saying? Just write it out and be like, oh my gosh, that was my first introduction to money. And what I often find, Anthony, is that people are like, no wonder money stresses me out. People were always fighting about it. Right. No wonder I don't think I'm ever going to have enough because that's what I grew up with, right? No wonder I hold on too tight because my parents were super frugal and never spent, right? And I sadly see more harder experiences than good experience, but some people are like, if I do this later in life, they'll be like, oh, no wonder I have a healthy relationship to money because my mom taught me how to balance a checkbook, right? And so, or it could be a dad too, but my mom taught me. So I'll give her credit and kudos for that.
Definitely.
So you start to be like oh, no wonder these are my habits and behaviors. And I think what's interesting, we talk a lot about money mindset. I know you have had people on the show to talk about money mindset, but the behaviors are not deeper. They're different than the mindset because it's kind of that muscle memory of how we react. And what I want to bring to the world is this idea that we can embody, like literally in our body, experience wealth differently by going to those muscle memories and asking questions of like, is that the same muscle memory I want to do? It's like going to the gym. Right. Is that workout really working? Do I need to make tweaks and adjustments? Why do I keep throwing my back out? So similar, right? You don't solve money by just doing one transaction. You have to go to the money gym.
And I love that because one of the things that we do step away from, and it's almost like when people ask me for this podcast, like, how did you start the podcast? Man, I got to think back on when did I start? Like, when did I started evolving this equipment to getting it to where it is today? And it takes time to go back that far. And one of the things that you have in your book, which I love, is that you have a lot of exercises that people can actually use to kind of go back in their memory banks to kind of pull that out, to write it down
Yeah.
so they
Yeah.
can tell that story. I greatly
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Totally. Or even if you want to like skip through the book, there's little
Mhm.
mini moments. And in all the little mini moments, I ask questions. If you get anything from it, just go to the mini moments. Actually, I should probably just write those in a list, right? Thank you for that.
You're
And
welcome.
then those are the questions that we can start to ask ourselves. And each, and I would say too, Anthony, those are questions that we can share with our loved ones, with our spouses, partners, kids, because again, we don't have to talk about numbers quite yet, but there's an entry point to just start to loosen a little bit of the rigidity and privacy that we have around money by just talking about what does wealth mean to me, right? What all the questions that I ask. So yeah, I wanted to make it practical, and I wanted people to pause and actually think through and feel through what I was writing.
Yeah. So can you tell us your money story?
Yeah. I mean, how much time do we have? So let me ask you a question, because
Yes.
there's a lot to say. Is there a particular entry point that you'd want me to highlight?
Let's highlight your first memory of money. It's like
Okay.
usually they say around age 8 is usually what
Yeah.
most people do.
So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to use the first memory of money, and then I'm
Okay.
also going to speak to my first conversation with money, because that was very enlightening. And there's a chapter on the book of how to actually have a conversation with money. So my first memory, I grew up in New Orleans, right? So in the suburbs of New Orleans, and it was back in the day when like there was like undeveloped land out in the suburbs, and so we'd all ride bikes, and I have like we're kind of going on these big, mud courses. And then I remember I'd get an allowance. My parents would have me work for my allowance, so I'd have my chores around the house. Actually was tied to exercise. They wanted me to exercise as well. So, definitely learned some things. I had my allowance. I had earned my allowance. My mom taught me how to keep a ledger. So to this day, I actually have a physical checkbook because I love writing checks. I love the organization to it. And then we would get our allowance. I don't know what it was, like a couple dollars. And we would ride down to our local drugstore, was K&B. And then we would go to the drugstore and just shop the candy aisle. So I just remember that I had earned the money. I wanted sweets, and so I'd go buy sweets. And then I remember clearly standing in the aisle and being like, how much can I afford based on the cash I have? So I actually feel grateful that I grew up in cash. You know what I mean? Because there was no credit card there. I had to work with the dollars I had. And so it taught me to think through, what did I really want? How much money did I have to spend? I never wanted to go to the counter and feel like I had brought too much, you know what I mean? And then be like, oh, I have to start to put some of that candy back. So it taught me to do quick math in my head. It taught me to understand taxes. But buying what I wanted at that moment, which was candy. And I remember to this day, I still practice that with my daughter, that if we're, every parent has gone through Target with their kids and they want everything, right? They're just like, if you give them a shopping cart, they would fill it to the brim. And so one of the things that I taught my daughter very young is that she has an allowance. She also works for allowance. And I often ask her, would you spend your money on it? And then she'll look at me and she'll like, I don't know, Mom. I'm like, okay, I need some clarity, because if you would spend your money on it, it's telling me something around what that product or whatever you want to buy touches. If you wouldn't spend your money on it, why should I spend mine? Right. And so it's helped us so I think one of my earliest money memories was learning choice and learning how to budget. And I think it's a good money memory because it was also connected to sweets. So
yes, gotta love the sweets.
Exactly. My first money conversation, though, and what I mean by a conversation with money, Anthony, is that I literally teach clients, and I'm teaching everyone in the book how to sit down and have a conversation with money. And this is really important. It's not a monologue. It's not us offloading what we feel about money, because I've heard it all. I've heard people just curse at money, push money away, because by the time we're older, we've had some challenging experiences, right? I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. I know what it's like to be like, oh my gosh, how's the next client going to come into the door? I mean, I was an entrepreneur, right? I had to build my practice. But the conversation with money is, you do get a chance to offload what you're feeling, but then you literally have to change chairs, and now your money responding back, right? And so it's a gestalt, it's a therapeutic exercise. They call it a gestalt chair exercise, where it's the empty chair. You put in the empty chair the object that you want to talk to. So I'm sitting here in grad school being taught this exercise. I take out a credit card that I had debt on, and I'm like, that I've been trying to figure out how to pay off. I put it in the chair. I was like, I have so much resistance to this exercise, but I'm going to do it. And then, oh my gosh, Anthony, I started telling money how it didn't show up in my life, how I didn't understand it. I mean, I'm in my early 20s, like all
Yeah,
this
yeah.
stuff. I switched chairs, and money is like, Elizabeth, you are strangling me. You are smothering me. You are holding on too tight. And I'm like, whoa, this kind of sounds like a boyfriend, right? That's my relationship style back then. But I think the important piece that I took away, because then Money and I kept having a conversation, and Money is like, hey, you are stressed out because no one has taught you how to be an entrepreneur. And which is so true. My parents were W-2, so they had that consistent paycheck. No one had taught me how to earn money in a different way. And I was holding on to money too tight, too afraid that it wasn't going to come in with, and not asking the questions that I needed to. It was like, how do I run a private practice? How do I feel comfortable charging people's fees? How do I set certain parameters? How do I say no to people who aren't my ideal client? Like, and Money's like, slow down, write those questions out. Who in your world can help you get clarity? Where do you need to research? What do you need to read? But it's not my fault, and don't hold on to me so tightly. And I was like, there was an aha moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, Money's totally right. I am so stressed about it that my mental and emotional resources are going towards trying to control it. I'm not doing my work in the world, which is the literacy, the education, the planning to face what's really causing me stress. So that was an aha moment, and it's an exercise that I share with everyone. If everyone could sit down and have a conversation with money, I think the world would be in a different place.
Oh yeah, it would be for sure. You're like, am I talking to you or am I talking to your money today? Like, what am I
Oh,
talking to?
totally. And people ask me that. They're like, I don't know if I'm really talking to money, and I'm like, that's fine. But there's a part of you that deals with money every day, so talk to that part of you.
Yeah, and it brings up the notion of abundance versus scarcity.
Yeah.
And in your book, you also talk about scarcity has like two poles of the same cycle.
Right.
So, what kind of practical advice that people who are trying to break that cycle would you give them?
Yeah. So I talk about this abundance scarcity loop, right?
Mhm.
And then I situate that loop within a bigger paradigm of satiation. And so what I mean by the abundance scarcity loop is that there are so scarcity is both tangible, real. Scarcity is also emotional and mental, right? And I think we need to distinguish between the two. And that's why I really emphasize that question, knowing how much enough is. If we're not meeting our bills, or we're in between jobs, or we got laid off, or we are in the hospital and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm racking up a huge bill, there is fire in that little part of scarcity. We have to deal with that. Once that gets stabilized, though, we can't get stuck in striving just for more money, because then we get stuck in this loop where I think I need more money to get out of the mental and emotional scarcity. And so what I do is that I put that loop of abundance scarcity within a bigger paradigm. It is our human responsibility, not money's. It's our human responsibility to understand, how do we fulfill all of our human needs? And that's really important, Anthony, because I put the three human needs that I associate with that abundance scarcity, which is financial stability, physical health, and safety. We need all three of those to feel secure. But once we have plans, or once we're out of the red zone, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you've met your emergency fund, right? It doesn't necessarily mean we can still be working our way out of debt. But we have to lift our head up and look at all of the other human needs and make sure that we're addressing them. So, for example, they include connection and belonging and touch and participation and understanding, freedom, like all these other human needs that I talk about in the book. Because if not, what happens is that we get stuck in this loop where we strive for more money, but we don't feel wealthier.
Yeah.
And that's a really important piece.
And it's sad though,
Super sad.
because I guess, and I always talk about this with my friends, or people that I'm having money conversations with. It's like money has level to it, and it's so many different things. Of you have to be in the right mindset for a different type of money that you want to bring into your life, and that's flowing through you, because the emotional aspect of it, like you have to sometimes take a step back and really think like, hey, is this really moving the needle towards where I want to go at in life? Or
Yeah.
is this something that, I just want, versus your needs,
Yeah, exactly. And I think funny enough is that, again, this is where we get stuck in that vicious cycle where we scapegoat money for things that aren't going well. And funny enough, if we're like, okay, let me actually address where I'm feeling off, right? Where life isn't going well in my life. Let me address that. A lot of times I tell people, look for strategies that are both financial and non-financial or monetary, non-monetary. Like, for example, if you're like, I need more connection, I've had this conversation with clients. I'm like, maybe that doesn't mean you're going out and spending a ton of money on dates. Maybe you're just going for hikes with a friend or having longer conversations. You know what I mean? There's both monetary and non-monetary ways to meet our needs. But funny enough, Anthony, once we start to feel a little more settled and fulfilled in our other needs, our ability to make money increases and improves because you're not putting that unmet need on money and doing what I did, which was I was choking it and smothering it. And money's like, I don't want anything to do with you, right? I mean,
Right.
literally, money's like, what am I doing here? You're totally irrespecting me. I'm like disrespecting me. And I'm like, you're totally right, buddy. Sorry about that. And so I'm able to address my other needs. And then when I'm dealing with issues around money, I'm like, I really hate car maintenance. I'm like, because I feel I don't know cars. And so when I take it to the mechanic, I'm like, oh my God, how did that bill just rack up? And so I have to sit down. I have a conversation with money. Money laughs at me and says, I know you don't like this, but this is for the health of your car. This is where we're going to take it from. If you took from your savings, this is how we're going to replenish it. And then I kind of at this point laugh. And I'm like, yes, I can't make the emotion go away, but I sit and I have a conversation with money. I let it go. I digest it. I release it. I'm on with my day. So it's a more efficient way of being in relationship with money.
Yeah, because now that we have that nice foundation, or at least how to start a foundation of getting that money conversation started within ourselves.
Yeah.
Because you're also part of the sandwich generation of,
Yeah.
taking care of your parents and you have kids.
Right.
How is that conversation now going well, you mentioned your kids, but how is that conversation now with your parents?
Um, So I think a big piece is about 5 years ago, I really made a considered effort, a conscious effort to sit down and be like, okay, let's bring some organization to the table, right? Let's start talking about what your needs are, where are your accounts, right? What happens if you all pass or one, lives longer than the other? Like, what are some of the concerns? What's left undone, right? What paperwork do we still need to sign, right? And so the organizational piece has been really important, working through their money patterns and behaviors, right? They're very different. And also, at this point in life, I have to take responsibility that my parents saved their own money for this stage in their life and also making sure that they're enjoying it. And it's funny because it's at the expense of me receiving it one day, but I'm like, that's on me. I need to learn how to also have my own relationship to money and earn it, and making sure that as long as they're able-bodied, to help them enjoy and create experiences with us. And so a lot of it, though, has been the organizational piece. Because what happens is that people can die and no one knows what's what, and they can leave assets. They can also leave debt.
Yeah.
We don't even know what the last wishes are. And so that's what I would recommend if you're in the sandwich generation, is making sure you're having as much of money conversations as you can. And what I tell people is that they don't have to tell you how much is there, but just, this is where my bank accounts live. These are the credit cards I have. This is where I keep my passwords. They can just tell you that so that if they pass, you know what your entry point is. This is where my will lives. Maybe you get a copy and it's in a sealed envelope, but all of that is really important, because if not, what happens is that our parents pass and the money stress of trying to figure out the practical pieces overshadows our ability to grieve. And that's no fun. So I think there's proactive things people can do today to get ahead of that.
And I think you're bringing up a good point of really where to start.
Yeah.
When something happens, because they always say the ugliest side of people happens around death, and it's sad. And also when they get a lump sum of money, or if they're supposed to get money, or they're supposed to get the assets, and the people who are living now Did they even have the conversation with all the children, not just one or two of them?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so it's just
Yeah.
crazy.
It is crazy. And, and I think that's where, I am the financial advisor for my parents, and I know that's a unique position. Not everyone gets to do that, but we have had very open conversations with my parents and my brother to be like, okay, what's our plan? And there's a plan if my dad lives longer than my mom. There's a plan if my mom lives longer than my dad, and that's been really important. And I think what I've seen in them, funny enough, is that they have more peace today because they can relax
That's
into a
good.
plan and they enjoy us more. And I think that's what people don't sometimes realize is that when you get over the hump of whatever emotion you have about talking with money and you actually do it and you organize it, maybe it was like you had to roll up your sleeves and do the work, but then afterwards you're like, oh, that feels great. I mean, it's kind of like a workout. Like I personally never am super excited to go work out, but every time I do, I always feel better, right? And so that's why I really like that metaphor. You have to go to the money gym. And there's what those exercise and workouts look depends on what stage of life you're in, but you got to go to the money gym.
How can we view money as a companion and a guide rather than a gatekeeper for our freedom? Because you mentioned about going to the gym
Yeah.
and making that part of the process, but now how can we make that our buddy?
See it as a personal trainer, right? And so, sometimes we go to the gym and we're like, I don't even know what to start. Do I do cardio? Do I go weights? Think of money as a personal trainer. And so one of the practices that I have that I talked about earlier is sit down, start having conversations with money. And if you can, do it for 30 days in a row and start to see what's there. And much like you and a personal trainer would kind of sit down and plan your workout, same thing with money. Because then as you have these conversations with money or the part of you that deals with money, you start to be like, okay, here are really my questions around finance, right? I just don't look ever at what I spend. What do I need to do that? Or I really want to start investing. I don't know where to start, right? Or how much should I be putting into my 401k if I have one or I don't have one? What do I do? So think of it as go to money as your personal trainer, literally offload what you feel about exercise or money. What your questions do you have? And then start tackling one of them at a time. Now, I will say, a personal trainer doesn't know everything. Money doesn't know everything, but that conversation can start to give you clarity of what's the next first step. And that's really important. And I think what's important about that is that a lot of times we see money as that gateway where I need to cross the threshold to feel better about myself, to feel enough, to feel wealthy. And money is like, wait a second, why are you giving me so much power? Right? I'm not a god. We treat it as a god. And money's like, oh, I mean, I love these conversations with money because I feel like money is like a little, talking, like, I don't know what that's on my shoulder. Exactly. And I can hear it being like, did you just hear what they said? Right. and it's actually, I think the comical piece is important because it brings a little humor to how we take ourselves too seriously with money. And money's like, no, let me just be a guide. Let me just be a friend. Let me be a personal trainer. I'm going to have my ups and downs. Some days you're going to open and check your app and be like, yep, I'm down, right? Either you overspent me or markets are down, whatever, but that's okay. Do we still stay in relationships with people when they have a bad day? We do.
Yeah.
Right. And so as a guide, or as a friend, you don't stay in a relationship with people you don't talk to.
That's true. And
so you have to start talking to it.
I like that.
And it's fun.
Because one of the things that is pretty prevalent is that you talk about the financial DNA.
Yeah.
What is the financial DNA?
Well, so financial DNA are what are the stories that we've inherited from our family, from our ancestors, what has shaped us. So for example, one of the main reasons why I wrote this book is that my grandfather, Walter, or I call him Opa, he was an Austrian Jew, and he fled Austria during the Second World War to avoid going to concentration camps, ended up in South America and Colombia. That's how, I look much more Colombian because my dad and my mom met in South America. But my grandfather, even though he figured out how to establish, he arrived with did not speak the language with $50 in his pocket in a port of just he didn't know, he had to start from zero, from nothing. And he managed to create a life for himself, right? He had a thriving private practice. He was a CPA, got married, had my dad, etc. But he never was able to shed the experience of scarcity because of that experience of persecution, which, he has one. I mean, that's so unfortunately prevalent in our human history, right? Wars, persecution, slavery, like it's part of our DNA. And so and I get it, in his lifetime, he didn't shed it, right? And so he just saved. And we'd go visit and he'd have holes in his socks and sleep on a super lumpy mattress. And he would not let us spend his money to improve even like basic necessities.
Yeah.
And so then he passed, and my dad took steps beyond it, right? Like with my dad, we did travel and he would buy us books and but there was still this feeling of scarcity. And so that's what my question was like, why we have enough? Why do we feel scarcity? Yeah. And so that's what started my inquiry for the last 2 decades. It's like, where's that feeling of scarcity coming? Because it's not matching my reality. And so a lot of what I talk about with the financial DNA is that, how your phone ever so often is like software update time, and you press a little button. Mm-hmm. I wish we could just do that, like software update. Does your reality match your experience of how you feel? And once we start to really kind of find stability in some of those abundance scarcity needs and they're met, in reality, a lot of times we haven't done that software update and we still feel scarcity when it's not really true. And so that's what's really been my passion, is like, wait, I have to move that scarcity through my body. Because in reality, it wasn't the reality that I grew up in. I grew up in, comfortable middle class in New Orleans. My dad had a great W-2 job. We were fine. Mm-hmm. And I went entrepreneur, and it was a little sketchy at first, but generally speaking, I have figured out how to provide for myself and my family. So scarcity is an outdated experience, but I have to help my body release it, because my mind can say, we're good, but my body's like, I don't know. And so it's having that conversation with my body, like, how can I help my body continue to feel like we have enough? And a lot of times it's taking, I love balancing my checkbook, doing my spreadsheets, but then I have to close the computer and I have to remember, Elizabeth, money told you not to obsess about it. Close the computer, take a breath, feel in your body. You have enough. You are enough. You can be enough. And that's my practice, to continue to move that experience of scarcity through my body. That's what my financial DNA has asked me to do.
I love those aspirations at the end, because that is something that I think we feel as though we never have enough. But again, with that DNA, and one of my coworkers had mentioned a long time ago, and it's still taking me time to kind of embody it, in a sense that our parents had created a platform, and you pretty much are running your own race, because the platform that they gave you, it's your job as a child to kind of move that platform to that next level.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you're not moving that plateau up to the next level, it's like you're doing your parents a disservice by not moving the needle. I always like moving the needle, moving that platform up to that next level, so that you can move the generation, the name, your family, or the financial DNA forward.
Yeah.
And I love that you use that term.
I just got chills when you said that metaphor of the platform. So imagine standing on that platform, Anthony, and that there's tiles, right? Like the platform is made of tiles, and every tile is a familial or ancestral story. Some of those stories are more triumphs. Some are hardships and failures and trauma, right? Yeah. And what happens is that sometimes if we don't know the tiles that we're walking on, we can fall into one of those more challenging or traumatic places and feel stuck and be like, what's going on? That's not my story, but I'm stuck in that. And so learning about your financial DNA gives you the ability to kind of push out of that tile and be like, okay, let me see, what tiles can I stand on? How do I harness the successes that my my lineage had, right? Maybe they perseverance and determination and they're hardworking. Let me take those qualities forward, be aware of what some of the landmines may be, but then start to kind of like step my way to my next platform. So I love that metaphor because sometimes we're standing blindly on it and you're like, why do I keep falling into that hole?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what therapists say. They're like, you see the hole, you keep falling into it. One day you see the holes there and you walk around it. I'm like, okay, we can do that.
And it's part of having those money conversations because we wouldn't know if you didn't have those conversations.
Totally. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And so if there's a specific takeaway, it's like, call up someone in your family today and be like, hey, what was your biggest success around money? What was your biggest hardship? And, again, you don't have to talk numbers. You can just talk experience. And you can ask like, yeah, tell me that hardship. Because guess what? I'm interviewing people in my family and I want to learn from it. Are you willing to share?
Yeah. That's actually how I started with the show. I was interviewing family members early on. I was like, yeah, awesome. So tell me your money, well, not your money story, but like, tell me what was the hardest part about, growing up in the 70s and the 60s. What was it like financially, where you guys, because I grew up, well, I would say low end income. So it was like always had wish sandwiches. I call them wish sandwiches now, but back then it was like, okay, well, I'm just having a syrup sandwich, a butter sandwich, ketchup sandwich or something like that. Cause that's all we had left. And the bread always molded or got old. So my mom learned how to make bread pudding with the older bits. And so she made it work. But I didn't know until I got older. I was like, oh, we were really broke.
Yeah. So. But you know what? Do you remember though what the feeling was when you were making those sandwiches?
Honestly, I felt happy as I was eating it. But I just felt hungry at the time. Yeah. And so like even now I eat a lot only because it's like I know what it's like to not have it. Yeah. But yeah, during that time frame, I mean, I was just a kid, just trying to make it.
Yeah. And so, but I think so what I'm hearing is that there's like two like there's the happy and the hunger, right? Yes. And when you were describing the happy, I'm like, there was a certain creativity in that. You're like, okay, well, how do I make these two bread sandwiches or like two pieces of bread taste something different? And you're like, oh, maybe it's ketchup today or syrup today. Mm-hmm. And so I can imagine, Anthony, that joy and creativity has also continued in your life. I mean, you're a podcast host, right? You're constantly being creative, and the hunger was a real human experience that, marked you. And so, and I think that's the piece. And my husband's the same way. He came, he was raised in an environment where sometimes there wasn't food. And we have the same conversations where like we have people over and he overcooks because he never wants that experience of not having food anymore. And we've had to have that conversation. Actually, funny enough, now because of a health thing, because he will overeat, right? Because that feeling of if there's food, I want to make sure that I have enough of it because I know what it's like not to have it, right? Yes. And so that's when you start to look at that in a total not judgmental way. And you're like, I get where that part came from, right? That was real and that was hard, but how do I start to satiate the hunger? And what am I hungry for now, right? Is it more calories? Or is it for other areas, and bring the creative part of you that felt joy to the areas that you're hungry for now? And that's how we start to do those software updates.
I like that. Okay. Because now you're putting everything together for me. And that could be the reason why it's like I was hungry for the information around finances and the reason why I'm being creative. Yeah. And best way to get the free information is to do a podcast. So I was like, hey, let me find all the financial experts in the area. Bring them on and let's have this conversation.
And funny enough, when you start to be like, because again, I see it with my husband, I'm like, whoa, that was a big grocery bill. What'd you buy? Right? And so, and as you start to kind of loosen, I'm like, I'm actually not so hungry for so many calories, right? I don't want to overbuy and have food go, funny enough, moldy in the fridge. They're like, what is it that truly nourishes me? Because I can afford to I can afford to buy the food today that nourishes me. And how do I channel the extra resources that potentially I would have put towards more food because I want there to be enough towards this thing that I'm learning in financial literacy that's catching my attention? You know what I mean? It's a rechanneling of resources because you've addressed the fact that that isn't your current reality anymore. It shaped you. And I bet you it also gave you drive, right?
Yeah.
In a way. But how do you rechannel?
Man, because we can talk for hours on this.
I
Because
know.
the book of habit got me going. Like I'm thinking back, it was like, okay, the power of habit, like how you change your triggers.
Yeah.
Like, what is your new joy now? What is your new satisfaction? Same entry trigger, but how do you change a
Yeah.
pattern for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you
Can I
read a
say
lot
one
of.
last thing
Oh
before we
yeah,
go
yeah, yeah.
into our
Please,
last
please.
questions? Is
Yeah.
that when you were talking about having how this podcast started and having interviewed family members? So I
Mhm.
would say two things, Anthony. At some point, sit down and have a conversation with money and see what are your today questions, right? Or what feels unresolved. Go back and listen to those original podcasts, right?
Yeah.
And see what are there patterns here? Like, is there something in my questions that resemble things that my family members went through? And again, just start to see what connections come out.
Oh yeah, I would definitely do that. Now you got me thinking about how I can gear up my episodes for the holidays coming soon.
Yeah, 100%, right? Because talk about, I just did an interview yesterday and we were talking about panic spending in the holidays,
Ooh,
right?
yes, that
And this
is.
is really important because in the holidays, what happens is that life is so busy and then the holidays arrive and you're going to go visit family and you're like, oh my goodness, did I buy enough gifts, right? Did I buy gifts? Did I buy enough gifts? Were they good enough gifts? And we get in these cycles and you literally do panic spending. And later you're like, maybe you show up and you're happy about the gift, but you're like, wow, that's a high credit card bill. You know what I mean? And so I think part of it is we still have enough time before the holidays to sit back and look and be like, what went well last year and what did not, right? And what do I have lined up in terms of family visits or friend engagements? And what would I do differently to avoid the panic buying? Because it doesn't feel good to you. Yes, maybe you made someone happy with a gift, but what's a more authentic expression of what we need to gift to each other, right? And so there's definitely families who are like, okay, let's just actually do one bigger gift to one family member and we do the Secret Santa or White Elephant. Or, I know in my family, there's years that we just practice like a love letter to each other. And there's no money spent there. It takes time, but then you read it and that's a gift that you just hold on to for ages, right? We still gift to the kids, but as adults, I think we need different things.
I need books. That's all,
Yeah,
that's all I ask
exactly.
for, and that's what I give too. Is I'll give away books, or I'll donate to the kids.
Yeah.
529 plans, and like
Yeah.
that's my gift.
Yeah.
And they know what they're gonna get from me. There is nothing changing, and y'all know what to get me. Some books. So that's it.
I love that because that is an authentic expression of you and people know it. So you probably avoid the panic buying, but you've taken the time to set that in action. And so that's a huge takeaway is that, how would you truly gift if you didn't feel the panic? And then do that, set that in motion.
Right. Because you didn't mention boundaries too much in your book. And I was like, that's a great topic. Because all the stuff you have is like enough, but it's like you do mention setting the boundary.
Yeah.
But I was like hopefully that you went deeper dive into that
Yeah,
portion.
no, we can talk. I mean,
Okay.
Anthony, between you and I had to cut a couple chapters out because it was getting too long. So
Gotcha.
don't get me started on what could have also been in the book. But so I have material for other things. I think, and I appreciate you bringing it up because it's a very important expression of enough is when we actually say enough, right? I've had enough of that. And boundaries are really important to be like, actually, what's coming towards me, an obligation, a work commitment, a situation where it's like I'm earning money, but it doesn't feel good. I need to be able to take a step back and be like, what can I change in this environment? Because I've had enough. So when I talk about the power of enough, it's knowing we know we are enough, but it's also knowing when we've had enough. I think there's only a small little bit in the book about that, but that is really important because a lot of times we live our life by default instead of design, and boundaries give you the opportunity to design your life better. And I think that's really important.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So this is the third segment, which is talking about the futures and what skills or habits that you feel is going to take you to the next level.
I think this ability to have meaningful conversations. If I'm honest, this is what I love. These conversations that are one-on-one. I love one-on-one conversations, but that can be heard by a wider audience. Because I don't have enough hours in the day to sit down and have one-on-one conversations with everyone. But this level of depth and connection and inquiry, I just come alive in it. And so I think that's what allows me to get to the next level of just being able to be a voice, even if it's for 30 minutes in someone's ear, to be like, hey, there's a different way of potentially thinking about it, experiencing it. So this is where I think it's a superpower of mine to dive into meaningful conversations. And I think it's the habit that will get me to that next level.
All right. I'm gonna slide this question in because I was just thinking about it because you were mentioning about the kids, and this whole book felt like a philosophy. It's like your money philosophy story. You as the old, mature Elizabeth, how would your young Elizabeth self will be proud of you today?
Oh my God, she'd be so proud of me. Thank you for that question. She'd give me a hug. So yeah, I feel like my younger Elizabeth self, I just felt like I did a sigh of relief of like, oh my gosh, yes. Thank you for sharing the story. Thank you for not passing on scarcity to my daughter. And it's not that I haven't passed on any of it, but with my daughter, we have a lot of conversations with money, and we talk about scarcity and we talk about needs, and I help her kind of tap into her body. And that's, and it's not that my younger self didn't get that. My mom was a therapist, so she definitely gave me a lot of emotional intelligence skills, but it wasn't in relation to money. And I'm like, we all deal with money every day of our lives, and we don't talk enough about it. We're not taught about it. And is that coming out right?
I got you.
In school, right? My little younger self is talking, but it's not rolling off her tongue. But so, yeah. And I think and maybe one day I'd love to figure out how to translate this book, because I wrote this book for adults, but it'd be super cool to figure out how to write it for teens and for middle school kids. And so maybe if there's anyone out there who specializes in that and wants to collaborate, right? But that'd be fun to get more kids thinking about this.
Perfect. So we done with the bulk of the interview, but are you ready for the final 4 questions?
Let's do it.
All right. Question number 1. What does wealth mean to you?
That's a great question. So wealth is an experience, right? It's the experience of, let me say something slightly different. So the power of enough is the experience of embodied satiation, right? That arises from moments of meaning in our lives and knowing how to digest them, and also knowing how to release and put boundaries on those that don't serve us, irregardless of external circumstances. So it's that sense, for me, the power of enough is a human right? As a baby, right? In the moment of birth, we feel like we're enough. We came with everything we need. And so how as adults do we reclaim that human right of just being enough? And so wealth is an experience instead of something to possess. And it's defined much more broadly on our ability to fulfill a wider spectrum of needs. And it's an experience that we accumulate for ourselves, that we share collectively with our community, that we can pass on to the next generation. But we can be wealthy and not be defined by money.
Wow. Okay. Well, just end the show with that. That was so cool.
Totally.
Number 2, what was your worst money mistake?
I vividly remember being about 23 years old. My grandfather died, that I talked about. He actually died when I was younger, but he had left me like $20,000, and my dad didn't give it to me until my mid-20s, which is actually a good thing. Don't give it to me when I'm 15, because I don't want to do that. But I remember, so a couple things. I remember when I got that inheritance, that was so much money for me, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I had already started thinking about this topic. I'm like, he just released $20,000 into the world. And I remember my grandfather being so frugal and hard for him to spend. I think I did the extreme where I exhaled and I spent that money. And I think if someone would have said, hey, back then it was probably $5,000, I wish I would have started a Roth IRA. I wish someone would have said, hey, don't just spend it, start a $5,000 Roth IRA. Because I think back then I was in grad school, I was waitressing, I was earning money. I could have done that. That would have been a way different. I would have multiplied that money by now. And so no one told me, like my parents taught me how to spend within my needs, how to track, but they didn't teach me how to invest. I wish someone would have told me that. Like, to all you 20-something-year-olds, start your Roth IRA now, right? No one told me, and I wish someone had. Yeah. And actually, it's part of why I went into financial planning. I'm like, how do you do this? I had to figure it out myself. So,
yeah. That's a whole nother episode about the Roth side of the house.
Exactly. You can invite me back. I'll come back.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Number 3, what is your favorite financial or non-financial book?
I have 2, actually. And they're both my back. So one, Beth, where is it? This is a great one by Beth Koblinger. I cannot say her last name. It says, Get a Financial Life. It is so easy to read. It's personal finance in your 20s and 30s. And it's like a glossary. So as you can tell, I've gone through it a lot. And it's a really good book. I'm sure there's a new edition. But it's like, where do you start when people are like, I don't even know where to start? This book, you can read it as per topic and per chapter. So it's super practical. So I love that book as like a practical starting place for finance, and I'll refer to it. And then I think the book that's financial, less practical, that inspired me was Lynn Twist's Soul of Money. She wrote that book 20 years ago. I've had the pleasure and honor of working with Lynn, and she wrote the foreword to my book. And she was the first one that I experienced in the financial industry that started talking about sufficiency. She has worked in across the globe with communities who have various different levels of wealth. And she just, again, similar to my story, just started asking those questions around sufficiency. So she's been a deep inspiration for 2 decades.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check out that book then.
Yeah, it's awesome. Again, they have it in audio. So
I appreciate it. Number 4, what is your favorite dish to make?
So I'm not a huge cook. My husband's the cook in the family, but I do have a dish that I learned from my mother, which is salmon in orange sauce. So I love salmon. I love fish. I basically you kind of like bake the salmon in a combination of orange sauce. If you have a little bit of white wine, you can add it, and rosemary on top. And I'll just bake it, super easy. Add some rice. I personally love kale salad, a little avocado. That is my, someone's coming over for dinner. It's my turn to cook. They get that probably every time. But
awesome. Yeah, it sounds good. Now, it's
really good.
Do you like crystallize, not crystallize, like do you like a thin layer of something on the salmon, or just like embedded in
it's kind of like marinated. Ooh. Sometimes the crystallization happens by happenstance, and sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. Awesome, but it's super yummy. Yeah. I love New Orleans cooking because that's where I grew up. I have not. I should learn how to make jambalaya and gumbo. Love to eat it, but I just have not figured out how to add that to my repertoire.
You got time. I
got time. Exactly. Exactly.
So is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say today is always the best day to start and take a step towards having a healthier relationship to money. Literally, you can just wake up, open your wallet, and say, hello, money, I see you. I don't know what I feel about you, but you're there. Let's start to have a conversation. And just, there's a lot of practical tips in the book, and even on my website. Those are the one on my website. They're free. Download them. But it's just like you wake up and you're like, okay, I could sit here and feel terrible about all the days I didn't go to the gym. But you know what? Walk into the gym today, right? Do a 20-minute workout. You're going to feel better just because you walked in and you did something for 20 minutes. Same thing with money. Just start with one thing today. And if you don't know where to start, make the list of questions. You don't have to have answers to all your questions. Make a list of 20 questions. Don't edit it. Take a step back and choose one. Then you can go back to the podcast and see, okay, did he talk about this podcast, right?
like that
This
one.
one
Yep.
question. And so just choose one and make that the theme of this month, is that I'm going to learn about this question. And let the curiosity guide you, right? Because you're answering that question in a way that's going to be unique to you. Have fun with it. So just start with one question.
I love that. That should be a podcast title.
Like I said, I'll come back.
Awesome.
So
So the last question I have for you on the podcast, which is, where could people find out more about you?
thanks for asking. So I have a website, which is basically my name, www.elizabethhusserl.com. My last name, just if you need to spell it, Husserl. I'm sure it will be below on the podcast, but you can go there. You can order the book there. I'll have resources from the book there as well, so people can download, because if you're on the audio, you want to be able to access all the resources that I speak to. So you can find a lot of information there.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, sharing your money story, teaching us how to create our own money stories, and actually being curious about money again, finding out a way to ask questions that we definitely need answers.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's, I was going to say, and it's kind of like that family member that showed up at the party and you're like, I haven't seen you in a while, right? Or maybe I have. Don't know what I feel about you. That is often our experience of money. And so take a step towards that person, take a step towards money, and be like, I'm going to own my feelings. Maybe I actually haven't taken the time to get to know you. So tell me your story and I'll tell you mine.
Love it. All right. So the power of enough, finding joy in your relationship with money. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for coming through and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with the About That Wallet audience. Thank you.
You are so welcome. It's been such a pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Y'all be safe. We out. Peace.